Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode. Today's guest is Jeroen Corthout. Jeroen is the co-founder and CEO of Salesflare, an intelligent CRM built for small businesses that are specifically selling to B2B, selling to other companies, and they are mostly popular with agencies and SaaS companies. So in the conversation today with Jeroen, we talk quite a bit about the origin story of how did he get to a place in his career where he was building a CRM. Because if you think about the CRM world, you're like, man, there's probably a lot of CRMs out there, because there are. But back in 2014, Jeroen discovered through personal need that way back then in 2014, none of the CRMs were doing what he needed his CRM to do for the companies that he was working with. So that led to the start of Salesflare. So in the conversation today, we dug in deep to his background story and kind of the origin story of how did he get from a person that was studying biomedical engineering, worked on a business degree and MBA, ended up working at Baxter, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. How does somebody go from there to a place where they are now operating a software company? And on the surface, for me, as I was doing my research, it seemed very detached. It seems like biomedical stuff and then software stuff. But for him, it was actually part of a journey and convergence of learning that he did over the course of about 10 years that got him from that place of working in the pharmaceutical world with Baxter to a place where he was now starting and running Salesflare. And I think it's really, really important context to understand why they approach the CRM the way that they do. So listen in for that backdrop story. And I think as a founder of a company, you'll appreciate his iterative cycle and sort of how he went from converging and experiencing different opportunities in front of him in different places of his career, which got him to understand and realize like what the opportunity was for him to start his company. From there, we talked a bit more and got into a bit deeper as to like, how do you think about a CRM that you actually use, using his words? And a lot of the conversation that we talked about was the idea of following up with leads and customers. We talked about the ideas of accountability and transparency. How do you bridge gaps? And ultimately, how do you make your prospects and how do you make your customers feel like they are the only one you are talking to? We talked about account mapping the proper way and adapting the outreach and adapting the communication with your sales leads based on individual situations. We talked about nudges for follow-ups. And most importantly, we talked about how to get thoughtful for your follow-ups. How do you get thoughtful with establishing the links between accounts and people at the accounts that you're targeting, the individuals, the people, the human beings on the other side that are getting your messages? And how do you map those accounts the proper way to make sure that you and your team are approaching your outreach and managing your prospects, again, using that word thoughtful in a thoughtful way. So I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with Jeroen. I learned a lot. It was really fun to hear his experience going through this entrepreneurial journey from person in getting an engineering degree to now running a CRM company, a software company that is now one of the highest rated CRMs on Product Hunt. In fact, it's now the most popular CRM on Product Hunt. It's a top-rated platform on a top-rated CRM on platforms like G2, and it's all because of its ease of use and automation features. So you definitely want to make sure you check out this episode. If you haven't listened to the Startup Selling Show before, I think you're in for a treat. This is the kind of stuff that we do every single day. The other thing to check out with Jeroen is his own podcast. So he has a podcast called Founder Coffee. And on Founder Coffee, he's interviewed people like Jason Fried over at 37 Signals. He's interviewed Chris Savage, who is the founder of Wistia, Rob Wally over at Drip, and many other people at some of the software companies you probably know and follow and may even use every single day. So not only is Jeroen doing these interviews, but he's also interviewing people like him to learn about how they're thinking about the problems they solve and how they're running their companies too. So check out Founder Coffee as well. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Jeroen Corthout. Jeroen, welcome to the Startup Selling Show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So we've got a lot of different topics to talk about. And one of the first places I always like to start with all of our guests is simply ask you, well, when people say, hey, Jeroen, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
I usually say I run a software company. Most people are bored when I go way further But I'm co-founder and CEO of Salesflare, and we provide small and medium-sized businesses with a CRM that actually works. It's a CRM for B2B sales mostly, and it automates and makes a lot of the things you normally need to do in a CRM much easier, which is why a lot of companies come to us. We have a few thousand companies using our software actively right now, and that's mostly agencies, marketing and software development agencies, and a lot of technology startups as well, but other types of companies as well, as long as they're selling B2B.
Yeah, you used the key word in there, which I'm sure was intentional when you said a CRM that actually works, because that's a question I get all the time from clients that we work with. It's like, what CRM should I use? Which one works the best? And I want to dive a lot more into your perspective on what makes for a CRM that actually works in just a couple of minutes. So I want to sort of leave that out there for the people listening to tune in. And before we get there, I was, in researching your background and learning more about how you became, CEO of Salesflare. One of the things that really struck me is in researching your background. So you have a wonderful education at Lieven. Am I saying that correctly?
Lieven,
yeah. And as part of your education, you studied biomedical engineering, and then spend some time at Baxter, and then spent 4 or 5 years at Across Health. So started off in the sort of healthcare space, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and now you're running the software company. So I'm just kind of love to hear a little bit more of the backstory. First of all, why was that so interesting to you, biomedical engineering and healthcare first, and then maybe we can talk about the transition over to running a software company.
Yeah, I'll maybe start a bit earlier even. I always like to build stuff that had many sort of forms. It would be building camps in the woods perhaps, or it would be creating some kind of thing. I remember dreaming whole vacations about building a catapult and how that would exactly work and all that. At some point, I found something really fun to build because there was a whole lot of creativity that could be unleashed, and that was websites. That was when I was 15, 16 years old. And I started building websites for myself, obviously, but then I started building one for my mom, who's an architect, and then some other ones. And I really saw myself starting a sort of website agency, which was a new thing at that moment.
So just for context, when you were 15 or 16, what year was that? Because I want to think about what tools you had available.
Around 2000. So to give you a good idea of where websites were back then, it was basic HTML.
Yeah.
GeoCities was big, or at least
I built the GeoCities website. Yeah.
Yeah. And the newest thing was Flash. So to build websites, I mean. So I was building a lot of Flash stuff, which was really nice because you could go anywhere with Flash. Of course, well, we know what happened with it and what was wrong with it, but at that moment, people didn't really see that yet. And yeah, my dream was really to build a company on that. I was sort of already building stuff there. And when I went for the open day for engineering, my dad's an engineer as well. I always knew I was going to do something in engineering, but I decided at that moment it was going to be computer engineering. But then when I went to the open day, I saw what these guys built there, and I talked to the people there, and I thought, man, these are nerds. This is not my place. This is not what I'm going to
do. What sort of stuff did you see that they were building that was, because and maybe this is maybe why you got into biomedical. I mean, you talked about building camps in the woods and catapults. I mean, those are tangible objects that you can touch and feel, and it's more mechanical. Is that was the difference that you saw? The computer stuff was more intangible?
It was more things that I was like, what is the practical value of this? I don't see it. Just guys building stuff. And I was like, but what's the point of this? I didn't get it. I don't remember exactly the things that I saw there. But I remember the feeling like this is useless. So when I started engineering, I forgot about the whole computer engineering part. what was most interesting to me was everything around electronical engineering. So that's the direction I started to take in my bachelor. I took business management with it because I always knew I wanted to do something there. And that was really interesting as a minor. And then when I could choose between the different branches, it had this new thing, biomedical engineering. And when I compared that with telecom, energy engineering, and microcircuits, it was by far the most interesting option because I could do actually impactful things. I could work on things like healthcare. I could learn new things because those studies had a whole medical part to it. So I could really enlarge my experience, background knowledge. But it was mostly the thought that I would do actually important things, which didn't feel the same if I was building microcircuits, for instance, or working for a big energy company, or for building the newest cell phone, whatever chip, or telecommunications stuff. So I went in that direction and I really enjoyed it. It was super interesting, biomedical engineering. It was only when I started looking for jobs that I didn't really feel like doing the actual engineering job, like being behind a computer, building something, not interacting a lot with customers. I wanted that customer interaction. And I remember in one of my interviews, they're like, oh, but then we could offer you the job of project manager, perhaps. And they made me do a test, and they decided I was going to be a very crappy project manager based on the test. So that evening, I was so disappointed. I was going to go out with a friend of mine, and I said I want to do business school, but my parents were against it because my brother had already done some study, and I was like, oh, it doesn't really add that much. So I used the credit card of my friend, pay 50 euros to do the entry test for a business school without my parents knowing. I did that test. I succeeded. I was one of the first to be called that day when they said these guys can start business school. I offered my parents that I would pay the whole business school experience. In the end, I only paid a part. I went that direction, and then that was really amazing. The whole field of management and economics and all that. We had all these very practical lessons, cases we had to solve and all that. And from there, I sort of decided that I was going to build my own company. That was for sure the plan, but I needed experience. And I was in healthcare, so I figured I'm going to be a product manager in healthcare because I thought it's sort of like having your own business. I have my own products, I put them in the market, it's sort of the same, I thought. So I joined Baxter, and there I quickly discovered that being a product manager is only a very small part of having your own business. I was even in the local organization, so I was getting marketing material from the European organization and basically cutting that apart, translating it in two languages, because in Belgium we have Dutch and French, and then training our sales reps to use it. It was incredibly boring job. So
here you got all this education in biomedical engineering. You decided you weren't going to do that. You go and get an MBA. You decide, I'm going to go be a product manager. You go do that, and you realize that that's not your cup of tea either. So now what? Is that what led you into Founder Institute eventually? Because I saw that it looked like you were like in the healthcare field at the same, like in between that, you also you had participated in Founder Institute.
Yeah. So at first, when I was at Baxter, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start my own company now. It's enough. And one thing that I was good at Baxter was nobody understood websites, and I did. And I figured, look, I understand websites. I understand pharma now after a few months. I thought I learned it all already, how pharma works. So I'm going to start an agency that builds websites for pharma companies. I thought there's good money in there. And then I talked to a guy, and he said, that's what we do. And then I joined that company, and that's Across Health.
Got it. So, and again, for context, though, when you said like you understood websites and people at Baxter in that industry did not. This is 2010 now, right? So we're starting, about 10 years later in 2010 is sort of this, I think, a much stronger resurgence as we have platforms like WordPress and others. And that's what you're thinking? Or what was the opportunity you saw and the gap that existed between where the pharmaceutical space was in terms of website technology and where you thought it could go?
It's mostly the way pharma works is very, very simply. I mean, there's doctors and sales reps go to doctors to promote products. And when at some point you feel like, I had enough with being a sales rep, I wanted to have an office job. I'm really making it a sort of, it's not true for everyone, obviously, it's a generalization. But then they take a job in marketing, because the job of a marketer in pharma is supporting the sales team. It's creating materials for the sales team, training the sales team, all those kind of things. So the thinking there is always you have to have been a salesperson before you go into marketing. I skipped that, but one of the few that skipped that step. And that means that marketers in pharma are mostly salespeople, and salespeople in general are not really people who enjoy building websites and all those kind of things or know how that works. So I was one of the few people there that understood just the basics of a website. And I thought there was a business there. And then I talked to this guy. I had a dinner with him, and he said, "That's what we do. You are too young. Nobody's going to believe you and stuff. But come work for us. 6 months, I'll teach you everything. And if you then still want to go out on your own, you go for it." So I joined them, and I stayed for 4 years. We did more than building websites. We basically helped pharma companies with everything that is digital to sort of go from that very sales rep driven model to a multi-channel marketing model, to all the different channels through which doctors can also find the information they're looking for, and similar things for patients. That's what we assisted companies with, and that's still a very good business for across health, especially now in times of COVID, where salespeople cannot really reach the doctor so easily anymore.
And so how did you, just curious about how did you come across the company like you said, you met this founder or the person running Across Health. How did you meet the person? Was that just coincidental, or?
He lived in our neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like a personal friend.
And I knew he was doing something with digital and with pharma. So I figured if I'm going to start this business, I have dinner with him and sort of hear him out about what he thinks about the idea. So.
Got it. Interesting. All right, we are off and running in my conversation with Jeroen. I love saying his name. It's a lot of fun. One of the things I want to make sure that you know about is all of the very cool stuff that we're doing each and every week and each and every month. Every single week, every single month, we are sending out content, frameworks, and every single month, we're doing online events open to the startup public. So as an example, recently I've run a live sales Q&A. We ran an online training, an online implementation session about the 5 shifts that you need to make to your sales process in 2020. We've talked about how to plan for the second half of 2020. Those are 3 different online events that I've hosted and run and sponsored, all completely free and available to you as a startup founder or an early stage, growth stage sales leader. So early stage, growth stage sales company leader, I should say. So the only way to find out about this stuff is if you're on our email list. And so if you're not on our email list, then you need to get on the email list so you can find out about this stuff. The easiest way to do that is just go over to SalesQualia, Qualia.com. And on SalesQualia, you can either click the button that says add me to your email list, or if you haven't already, download a copy of my latest book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Either way, what we'll do is add you to the email list. And so that as we're sending out content, sending out frameworks, playbooks, and other online events that we're hosting, that you'll be the first to know about it, so you can grab a seat before they all disappear. So that's it for now. Let's get back to my conversation with Jeroen Corthout. So then doing that for a few years, 4 years, you said 6 months, and you ended up for 4 years. And so the reason I wanted to dig into that kind of origin story, if you will, because it's kind of this path I think a lot of us have followed, where you think you're going to go into biomed, you think you're going to go into business, and then all of a sudden through experience with the marketplaces where you start to identify, okay, there are some gaps, and then you start identifying those gaps that you want to fill. And for you, it was that sort of meandering trail led you to this gap around websites, technology in healthcare. And that's what got you sort of, it sounds like kind of that sort of foundational block, 10 years of foundation that kind of set you up for that next phase in your career. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah, for sure. And then it was at Across Health that we worked a lot with Salesforce, and I didn't really like Salesforce. And you see, it all comes for a reason. And sometimes people are like, okay, I want to start a business, and then you just start thinking up ideas out of nothing. But it really helps to look where you've built up experience, what your biggest frustrations are, and sort of go from there. And at times it happens. It's not easy to force starting a business. The good ones, just all of a sudden you think, okay, this is something, and then you start working on it.
And so the 4 years that you end up spending there, was there a point where you felt any level of impatience, or like, because you stepped in and with the founder saying, well, I'll come for 6 months, and then if you still want to do it, you can start your own company. But like, why 4 years? At what point did you feel like, okay, now it's time to do my own thing? Was it just like that much learning happening that you didn't want to leave because you felt like it was too valuable to stick around?
It was very good for a long while. So I got a lot of responsibility, could do a lot of cool projects. But I still knew I wanted to start my own thing. And I was sort of stuck on that. I was on this track of like, what am I going to start? I don't know, this, that, always going in circles. And that's, you talked earlier about the Founder Institute. The Founder Institute was my way of forcing myself to just do something. And what I worked out in the Founder Institute, so the concept of the Founder Institute is when you start it, you sort of commit to starting a company. And that means you start everything, including the company itself as an entity. Otherwise, you don't graduate. And that was very appealing to me because I really wanted whatever I wanted to start a company. So I went part-time at Across after I graduated from the Founder Institute. And the company I was working on was a feed reader for doctors, because doctors are a target group that consume a lot of research, but they're not researchers. They want to be fed with research, and the way they consume it is very weird because they basically subscribe to journals, and these journals don't necessarily completely align with their interests, things like that. So I built something for that. The problem there was that, one, it did not have a nice business model. And because of that as well, it was very difficult to find a co-founder. I started developing the thing myself. That didn't make a lot of sense. And after a while, I just dropped the project. I did a few other things. I built a website. My wife is Brazilian. And we had a lot of people in Belgium who wanted to go to Brazil for the World Cup. And I thought, oh, in general, that's a thing. And I could make a website that explains people how they can go to the World Cup and what kind of travel they can build around that. That was a very stupid idea, but I worked in that for a month or so. And then I applied to a health startup weekend. And with our team, we won the weekend. I then went to one of the first accelerators in Belgium. We got into that accelerator. We got money and all that. But then things started sort of stalling there. It was a team from a startup weekend. You can imagine it's just some guys thrown together, and it didn't really go anywhere at that point, at least. So I decided to scrap the project. Right now, that company has taken millions in funding already. I'm not in it anymore, but at the moment that I got out, it was just doing nothing. And then one day, my current co-founder calls. I met him in the Founder Institute. He was working on another company. And he calls me and he says, I have this business intelligence software company. We are going to have a booth at a big IBM conference in Vegas. And we still need a sales guy. Do you want to join? And I'm like, sure. I mean, I can just take a few days off because I was working part-time. So week in Vegas was a few days off at my job. And we
So
went
this was
there.
more like a temporary thing, like, hey, could you just come help us out at the booth? We need somebody who can talk to people coming through.
Yeah, I was the person who would stand in the aisle and I would say, "Do you use IBM Cognos?" People would say yes. I'd say, "Oh, cool. Do you happen to have this and this problem?" And they're like, "Yes, we do." And I'm like, "Okay, we have these products for that." And they're like, "Does it do that?" I'm like, "I'm gonna hand you over to the guys here." So the 4 others would be there, which were all business intelligence software consultants. They knew all the technical stuff, and I would hand them over and then take the next person and bring people to the booth.
You are an in-person SDR. It's basically you're like an in-conference SDR.
Yeah, I love doing conferences. It's really nice having a booth at conferences. Most people just stand there behind whatever they have set up and wait for people to come. But I like to have the sentence that grabs that quickly identifies the right leads. You grab them, bring them to the booth, have a conversation, and then usually somebody else takes care of the conversation, and I grab the next one. Works really well. So we had a lot of leads there from that conference, and my co-founder said, "Do you want to join to help us with sales and marketing and all that?" And I was like, "Yeah, maybe this is the thing I should work on." So I started scrapping some of the other things, including that company from that health startup weekend. And it was at that company then actually that when we were trying to organize all these leads properly, that we just couldn't find any way that worked for us. Like we tried some CRMs. I knew Salesforce was not the thing. We tried Zoho, I remember, a few others. We ended up in a Google Sheet because we didn't see the point of all these systems that were slow and you had to go in different places to do all kinds of stuff. Then the Google Sheet was not properly up to date, which made that we were sometimes contacting the same person again. And then we figured, like, why are we actually keeping all this data here manually? Because all that data is already somewhere. The fact that we emailed someone is in our emails. The fact that we called a person is in our phone. The fact that we set up a meeting with them is in our calendar. So we started thinking of a system that would automate that for us. Plus, we were in touch with business intelligence software people, and if anything,
meaning companies like Domo and Tableau, those types of platforms, or other types of business intelligence?
No, we were talking with the business intelligence software professionals at bigger companies.
Oh, got it.
That would use software like this, although they would mostly use IBM Cognos because that's similar software from IBM. Because our software was compatible with that. It was basically making up for the weaknesses of that product. But they had very long cycles. It was very hard to get in touch with them, to follow them up and all that. So one of the things that was really important for us as well was email tracking, to see whether people opened the email, clicked on the email, what pages on the site they looked at, so we knew what product of ours they were interested in. So that was immediately also part of the solution. It was sort of a system that would keep track of everything that happened, plus the touch points. So we would have a very good idea of where we were with each customer, what was discussed, what they were interested in, but without us having to manually do a lot of things. Because we had, I think, 150 leads or something, we didn't want to spend all our time documenting what we did and tracking and all that. We wanted the system to do that for us. And that's how Salesflare was born.
Got it. So now we've got, just like as another checkpoint in the whole journey, now it's 2014, and there's more convergence of like experience in the business world, experience with digital agencies in the past, like with Across, you said you had some familiarity and some interaction with Salesforce. Now you're out there at a booth, you realize, okay, we have all these leads and we need a better way to keep track of them. But part of me is like, and I'm sure somebody listening to the story might go, well, okay, it's 2014. You want to track emails. You want to make sure you get meetings booked. You want to check to see if people are opening up emails that you send. There's probably already like 50 CRMs on the market. So what about like what you saw as an opportunity? And maybe this gets into, as we talked about at the top of the conversation, like a CRM that actually works. What did you see was missing from the current product set that was out there? Because by 2014, like Salesforce is a monster. You have lots of other platforms out there, Zoho and Pipedrive, and like literally 50, 100 other CRMs. So like, talk to me a little bit more about where you feel like the gap existed and how people should be thinking about a CRM. What brought you down that road?
Having a wrong idea of where CRMs were in 2014. Every other CRM out there would not synchronize emails. It would always have this BCC address.
Oh, that's right. We're still doing the BCC thing back then.
Yeah. Or you could
I forgot about that.
You could add an email manually into a CRM. So when we would have conversations, people were like, "Really, you would have all the emails in the CRM, not just the ones that matter?" Because that's how the CRM companies have been selling it. Like, you don't want all the CRMs in all the emails in the CRM, only those that make sense, But we made an extremely tight email integration and calendar and phone and different things. And it was only after we were on the market for a while that other companies also started doing similar things. Although we are still the only one that I know of, at least, that starts from, let's say, the existing data, that starts from automation first. So bringing you data, you can curate it by accepting certain things and all that. And then only you added things manually, while all other CRMs come from the standpoint that doing things manually is the norm, sort of. It's the first thing. And then we add stuff on top of that automates part of the things, which is a whole different way of thinking about how it should actually work. And initially, actually, we saw our system as a sales platform. So we were like, there's all these companies out there that are using Salesforce. Everybody agrees that it doesn't work for salespeople and sales teams, and companies are missing out on data. They're dropping leads just because it just doesn't work in a practical way for sales follow-up, and it's not attractive for salespeople to put their data in there. There's way too much input needed, and they don't get much back.
So I'd like to ask you some questions on that. So, irrespective of your product or others, and we go just thinking about like core principles around a CRM being a sales platform. How do you think about, and I don't know if it's like, what's the definition of a sales platform versus a CRM, or like, what are some necessary conditions from your perspective that somebody should be thinking about a CRM? Because I get this question, it feels like every week. People ask, what CRM should I use? And my general answer to them is, well, the CRM that you should use is the one you actually use, meaning that, to some degree, using something is better than nothing. And if you could buy you could buy Salesforce and say, well, I've got the best CRM out there. So you think, but if you're not using it, it doesn't matter. I could buy your product and I could buy it thinking it's the best one, but if I don't use it, it doesn't matter. So for someone that's either first implementing a CRM or has a CRM that they're not really using, how should they be thinking about what constitutes a CRM that I actually use?
Yeah.
How should I be thinking about that?
Yeah. If you would talk to our customers and you would ask, what do you use Salesflare for? The salespeople themselves, or the ones that are busy with the customers, whomever that might be, they would say to follow up leads and customers. And if you talk to management, they would say, we want to keep the overview, and we want to create accountability and transparency in teams around who they're talking to, what they're discussing with them, and also sort of bridge gaps when people are sick or people leave the company or things like that. Now, the follow-up leads is really core there. You can buy Salesforce and you can put some stuff in there. You can enter some data. But if Salesforce does not help you to actually follow up more leads at scale in such a way that every lead, prospect, customer, whatever, feels that they are treated the way they should be treated, that they're like the only one, if that makes sense, then the system is not working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So in fact, I just got off a coaching call with one of our clients. We were talking about, for example, prospecting and outbound, and the importance of making messages personalized. And it feels hard to do because it is, but a necessary condition, particularly when you're doing outbound, to make sure that that person feels like, okay, this message is meant for me. It's not the 17th in-mail I've got requesting a demo where somebody is just like clicking send. And so the premise is like, I'm the only one. If I'm getting this email from a salesperson, it should never feel like I'm one of 1,000 people that got this email. I should feel like this one was meant for me. I'm the only one, using your terminology. And so what's an example of that could give somebody a model in their mind when you say like the lead should feel like they are the only one? How would you describe that to somebody? Or what would be an example of that?
Yeah. So when you use a CRM properly, you know exactly what was last discussed, what the person cared most about, what the biggest objections were that they had, the people internally that had to talk about, all these things that are important in sales. And you have that mapped out in a proper way, instead of sort of having an idea of that. And then you use that in such a way that it's fully adapted to their situation. So you're not coming at them with your generalistic approach. Obviously, you have a sales process in place through which you generally take people, but every person that you take through there is taken through it in such a way that you're guiding them through the sales process in a way that makes most sense for them. Now, that requires a lot of tracking of information. That's what we try to make easier. And it also requires some nudges here and there of when to follow up and all that. We add that as well. Now, that's in the sales follow-up part, where you're putting more work in there. It's more work-intensive part of the process. If you are, like you're saying, doing outbound prospecting, and you haven't talked to the customer yet, and these things are not relevant yet, what you want to do at that moment is do your research properly. And it's easier than ever nowadays to do your research on companies and people and what they need and all these kind of things before you talk to them. And then personalize your message in such a way that it feels like you understand them without even having talked to them. We built in Salesflare, there's also a thing called email workflows with which you can build email sequences. And if we send out personalized emails there, a thing you can do is in a custom field type text, you can put a sentence that is specifically personalized for that company or person you're reaching out to. And that's sort of in a general email, which is templated. You have this thing that people feel like this can never be something that they send to every person. And when people have that feeling, you just make such a higher chance. It takes a bit more work, but you just get so much generalistic stuff at you every day.
Yeah,
nowadays, that when you feel that something is specifically written for you, that makes a big difference. And using whatever funny personalized images and all that, it's nice, but it doesn't make the difference. It's really someone trying to understand you well, and then writing a message that is very specific, clearly very specific for you.
So yeah, I want to go back to a couple of things that you said here, Jeroen, around, for example, you said like the account should be mapped the proper way. So I think, we're talking about nudges for follow-up, or talking about personalizing the email. I think a lot of people might say, well, I already do that, right? Or my system already allows me to do those things. When you say, in your mind, like the model from which you're operating, when you say that an account should be mapped the proper way, what are some mistakes that people make or tend to make that it means that if they heard this, they go, oh man, I'm actually doing it the wrong way?
I don't remember the context of mapping accounts a proper way.
Oh, just you were talking about the idea that the person receiving that email from you, or the contact, right? We talked about it. That person should feel like they are the only one, right?
Yeah.
And you said that means around what are the topics we covered, what objections might they have, mapping the account the proper way, and adapting the communication to their situation. And so what are some things that people are doing incorrectly, for example? when it comes to like they're improperly mapping an account, or maybe conversely,
this is when it comes to sales follow-up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is like, as you're describing Salesflare and, at the origin of the company with the product, right? The idea of automatically pulling in all of those emails instead of the old BCC thing that we joked about. Those are big differentiators. And so I was curious to know, like, how do you think about these things differently? Because now there is a preponderance of CRMs that a lot of people would argue, well, all CRMs do all of these things.
Yeah, all CRMs do these things, but they still don't take it super seriously, but it's a whole other story. They still take it as
What do you mean by that? No, I'm curious now.
They still take it as a sort of side thought. We're going to pull in some emails which will make people happy, but they haven't really thought through all the potential of how it can all work in such a way that you basically almost have no work in the CRM, but it organizes itself for you. So to give you an idea, if you create a company or software, you start typing. It's sort of like a search engine. It says, so I type sales qual. It says sales qualia. I'm like, yes. I click on it. It fills out the website, the logo. I hit create. At that moment, it will get more information about your company, the size, the logo is there, the website is there. It was already there. The address, maybe the phone number, things like that. Then a bit lower, you will see suggested contacts. So I can see that I was already in touch with you. And maybe I was already in touch with a colleague of yours because we were emailing about this podcast and all. Salesflare will tell that, this person and that person and that person. These contacts might have more information on them already because you sent me an email with your email signature. That might already be in there. Or we found information about these people from web sources. We get information from Full Contact, it's called. It's a big database. Based on the email address, we'll get more information about you. Now you can just click to accept these contacts and they're immediately added to the account without you having to enter the contact and do all the work for that. Now a bit lower on the page, you might also see that your colleagues know even more people because they have their mailboxes and calendars attached as well. You can see the network of your colleagues also at the company, and including the connection strengths. So I can see that my colleague Carrie maybe emailed with a colleague of yours quite a lot. That's something that's visualized as well. And as soon as I add the contact to the account, it just pulls in the history automatically. It doesn't matter very much in which order you do it, whether you, so for instance, let's say you have a phone number that came from your email signature and I click to add you. At that moment, it will pull in the calls that might have been in my Android phone and it just hooks it up. And it doesn't matter what happened first or whatever. The system is built in such a way that it always works. The same for meetings in your calendar or emails in your inbox. It will just come there, including if I have had tracked emails and people have clicked on one of the emails and went to the site before or after. All that just gets dynamically pulled together and visualized for you.
So you just described for me the proper definition of mapping an account. So, because as you're describing this cascade of information, I'm imagining myself, like, I do some prospecting on LinkedIn. People connect with people, or they'll connect with me. I'll email with some founders, or some founders will email with people on my team. And one of the things we teach our clients is this idea of account mapping. It's like a broad concept, getting sense for who's talking to who. I met someone at a conference. My colleague emailed with someone else. The marketing team has been in touch with these people. And when you talk about mapping an account the proper way, what you've described is getting full context for all communication across those different people. And that feels like, to me, a missing piece for a lot of people, in that whether they're using Salesflare or not, like this concept of proper mapping, because it feels like to me, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, especially in the day and age of like SDRs and hitting send and sending out these email sequences, we get this list of people in our target account and we start sending and blasting emails, or maybe we do some calls to follow up the emails. but it's only one email, one line of communication, one sequence with one contact.
Mm-hmm.
And that SDR is missing all of the other context that may have existed. Like, what if I'm an SDR, but my founder is already connected to the founder of the company that I'm trying to target? I should know that, but most oftentimes I don't as an SDR. So I don't, without that context, then it makes my outreach feel almost isolated, and it makes it feel like I'm not contacting that prospect as the only one. They're just one of a number. So if instead they had all this contact, all this mapping, that would significantly increase the intelligence across the organization, but also allow me to provide a much more intelligent outreach to the people that I'm targeting.
Yeah, it sort of feels disrespectful when you don't, when for instance you email the one person and then without whatever, you make a list and then email those people again the way you just described. Like, people appreciate when you're thoughtful about these kind of things. So when you know, like, oh, my colleague was already in contact with your colleague at that point about that, now we're back to discuss this or something, that makes a whole lot more sense. And that's something I often have. For instance, if we're reaching out to often to SaaS companies about different topics, like, is it for exchanging content pieces or for integrations or whatever, and then disregarding these sort of links that exist between our teams is, I think it feels disrespectful.
Yeah, I mean, the information is there. It's in an email or it's in a LinkedIn exchange, or the data exists. And so I like this word thoughtful. Like, I circled that in my notes here. It's like being thoughtful. And that word thoughtful can mean a lot of different things. I mean, being thoughtful in the sense of it's personal. Like, if you write a thank you note to someone, you say, wow, that's really thoughtful of you. You were thinking of me and only me when you wrote that note. And the word thoughtful also means sort of intelligent and cerebral about how I'm approaching this account. I want to be thoughtful about how I'm approaching this account, not just like batch and blast. So this word thoughtful, I don't know if you chose that purposely, but semantically, and when I heard that word, I think it's a key phrase or a word that most people, if you ask them, like, are you being thoughtful in your outreach? They probably kind of look at you and go like, wow, I never really thought of it that way. Am I being thoughtful? So I love that word.
And it's hard nowadays to stay thoughtful because salespeople need to reach more and more people. It's really a business of scale, much more than it used to be. And doing these kind of things at scale and still remaining thoughtful is really, really hard unless you organize yourself for it. So.
Well, that's really useful. I think that's also a good place to wrap up. I know it's getting late in the day for you, and I appreciate you spending time. It's almost 6:30 where you are, and I know you're at the coast, so I don't want to keep you from the rest of your afternoon and evening. So if somebody, they heard this conversation and they wanted to learn more about Salesflare, or they wanted to get more thoughtful using that word in their sales process, like, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, or just to start learning about what you all are doing there at Salesflare and identifying whether or not it's a good fit for what they want to do?
Yeah, Salesflare is very easy. Just you type Salesflare in Google or salesflare.com. It's Flare, like Flare. And if you want to get in touch with me, I guess you'll have to read my name somewhere. But if you type my name in Google, there's only one person with my name. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Please use a thoughtful message there. Don't just hit connect, because I get a lot of people who are reaching out at scale, let's say, without any sense of what they're doing.
Get those every day.
Yeah, so I will not know that you listen to this podcast and liked it and want to connect. So please write something.
Yeah, and I think Salesflare, so we'll put a link to both the company website in the show notes as well as directly to your LinkedIn profile. And I'm in LinkedIn right now. And even if you type Salesflare in LinkedIn and search for the company, then obviously you can find Jeroen's contact information and page, and as well as other people on his team. So Jeroen is spelled Jeroen. So for those that do want to find it, but pronounced Jeroen, as I learned earlier on today. Well, look, man, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you sharing so much of the backstory and the journey, because like I said before we started recording, like on the surface, it's sort of from the outside looking in, you're like, okay, this person was in like biomedical healthcare science and then all of a sudden started a software company. That seems a little like, what was the jump there? And turns out there's no jump at all. It was just ongoing convergence of learning new gaps, new opportunities, and then eventually getting to the point where out of personal need, you realize like, wow, I need a better CRM that's going to do all the things that I needed to do and be a CRM, like using your phrase, a CRM that actually works. So I think that backstory, I think, is really important to understand how you thought about how to build Salesflare and the problems you guys are solving every day.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me, I would say.
Yeah, I would say thank you for joining us. We'll let you know when the episode's ready to share out, so you can share it with your group as well. And
I'll certainly do that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, man. Well, Jeroen, it's so good to talk to you. Have a good rest of the afternoon and a good night.
Thank you.
Talk soon. Yeah.
Fun
Bye.
there.